Hey, what's up, guys? This is Zane from Insane Comics, and I have something special for you guys today. We're going to be doing lettering on Photoshop. This is my first training session. I have some notes for things to go over, but I want to get some feedback from you guys at the end of this. I did want to do this live at one point, but things just didn't work out. And the recording might be better because I will be going over a lot of basics of Photoshop in this, and it might be, for some people who already know how to use Photoshop, might be too basic. So, this will allow you guys to kind of forward things that are not really relevant to you. All right, so let's just jump right into it. I am using this page that I'm working on from a comic series that I wrote called Elemental Balance. I do most of the lettering for that series. Lettering consists of mainly three things. The text, basically, whatever we're writing. Shapes, which are essentially these bubbles right here. And the third thing is called sound effects. Over here I can show you this, yes, but it's not really a sound effect. But the things that sound like boom, pow, stuff like that, that's your sound effects. Or at least I call it sound effects. There's a different word for it officially. But in this session, I'm going to talk specifically on the text aspect of it and shapes. We're going to leave the sound effects for a different session because we're going to be talking about a lot more different tools. So let's jump right into it. I'm going to go over the basic tools in Photoshop that you're going to use specifically for lettering, and then we'll kind of go through each tool one at a time. So here's a page that I've worked on that I've done, and we're going to go over this real quick. So the first thing that you need to know is this section on the right-hand side, which is called your layers section. Here you'll see I have a bunch of what they're called layers. And each one of these layers are essentially things or like either text or shapes. So here's a text and here's a shape. And so that gets put over here. And the way this works is, let me get out of here. Let me just kind of undo that. The way this works is whatever's stacked on top will show in the front, and whatever's stacked in the bottom will go behind. This is going to be important because, for example, you want this text to show above that shape, so then this text will need to be stacked on top and the shape will need to be stacked in the bottom. Otherwise, the text will be behind this shape. And you'll see a little later on when we start working on these and putting these together how that's important. Okay, the next thing is we're going to go to the tools section on the left-hand side. In here, there's going to be several tools that we're going to use. Now for text, we're primarily going to be using this move tool. Look over here when you click on this, or when you right-click on this, it has this letter right here, V. What that means is that that's the keyboard shortcut to get this tool. And I think if you learn the shortcuts, it's going to make your work so efficient. So you don't really need to care about all this other stuff for now. The other thing that you're going to mainly need is this T. And this T essentially is the text tool. And that's one that you'll use for the text. And then when we start working on the shapes, for the shape bubbles, we're going to be using this white arrow right here, the direct selection tool, and this custom shape tool. All right, so let's get into it. We're just going to start from the top so you know how to use it from the beginning of how to upload an image and whatnot. So the way you're going to upload an image is File and Open. Let me just do it from Chapter 1. Okay, let's do this. All right, so I have this image opened up. One of the things that I wanted to mention is if you're planning on taking this to the printer, there's two different modes, and without getting too much into the detail of it, there's an RGB, which I think means red, green, and blue, and then there's another one called CMYK, and you've probably heard of both, but essentially CMYK you'll use whenever you need to send this to the printer, and whenever you need to display this on like websites or like online through screens, you'll have an RGB. So I would recommend you work on a CMYK if you're planning on printing these comics. And so the way to tell if your image is RGB or CMYK is you look on the very top and it says right here RGB. And the way to change that is you go to Image, Mode, and then you see these are all these different options. You're going to click CMYK. All right, and it says blah 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 blah. All right, so now you'll see on top it's CMYK. And essentially what that is basically doing is it's setting it up, all the colors into how the printer will recognize it. So your colors over here are going to match more with the printer. There's a thing called color shifting. That happens is if you send your comic book with RGB to the printer, they can convert it to CMYK, but the results don't come out so well. So I recommend that you convert it right here, right now with the CMYK. All right, so now that we have this converted to CMYK, the next step is let's start adding some text to it. So like I mentioned, you're going to click on this text tool right here, and then you're going to start writing something, yada, yada, yada. All right, great. We can't even see this, right? So now let's go over the tools to see how we can actually view this text a little bit better. When you clicked on this text tool, on the very top, this menu showed up. We're going to go through each one of these. You look at this section over here, and it says toggle text orientation. It just makes it from horizontal to vertical. You're really not going to use that. Let me just zoom into this real quick. What I use to zoom in is I click on the keyboard Alt and I scroll, and that's how you zoom in. There's other ways of zooming in. I think you can change the percentage here, but to me this is the easiest way to zoom in because wherever your pointer is at, it's going to zoom into that area. So it makes it very easy. All right, so we're looking at this very closely. All right, so this looks pretty bad because we can't even see it. The way we can now look at it is we need to change the color of the font, and we'll do that in here right now just so we can see it. You go into the top, you see this little color button right here. This is how you change the color. You click on that, and let's say we select black. All right, that makes it a little bit better. But it's still pretty small, right? So on the same menu on the top, and if you look at this right here, at least, or pretty much all of this, it looks pretty close to, like a Word or any other, software that you use where you have text. Essentially, this is where all your fonts are. This is how you can change it from bold to regular. This is the size, so let's change the size a little bit. And then I don't really ever use this sharp, crisp, from smooth. I don't know. You can use it if you want to play around with it, see how the results come, but I don't really use it. And then this is, typically when you're working with comic book lettering, you're going to always keep it to the center text. All right, now we're going to go back to our move tool, and we're going to get this and start moving this around. Now, one thing I want to mention, you might end up having it to where it starts doing something like, well, it's not doing it right now. All right, where you're trying to move this, but you end up moving this, and you're like, oh crap, what's going on? So the reason why that's happening is because on the very top, when you have this move tool selected, is you have this auto select selected, and what that does is wherever you point at is what it's gonna move that, and it comes really handy when you're working with text. So I always keep it in auto select, but I don't want this image to be moving, or my background image, and I don't want to like ruin it with any kind of paint or anything like that. I want to protect that. So the way to protect that image is you click on this layer with the image on the layer section, and then you click this lock button. Now that we click this lock button, we're not moving it. It's not going anywhere. Only this text we'll move this text around. All right. So going back to the top section, one of the things I wanted to mention is when you're looking at your font and you're selecting your font, do me a favor and do not use Comic Sans. That is pretty much, even Comixology has it on their submission requirements not to have that. It's not professional when it comes to comic book writing, and the Comic Sans font I'm talking about is the one that comes with Microsoft Word. If you don't know how to find a font or where to find fonts, there's a site that makes comic book fonts, and it's free, or a lot of them are actually free. You can sell your comic books and you don't have to pay royalties if you get your fonts from this site right here called blambot.com. They have some really cool comic book fonts. Definitely check it out. It's right under here. You have dialogue fonts. They have sound effects fonts. So just kind of go through them. And the way you know which ones are free, it says right here, the free fonts. So you got this, like for example, this one right here, the Acme Secret Agent. That's a pretty cool font to use for text. They have this place over here Oh, right here, lettering tips. So you go to how-to articles and lettering tips. And so this will show you the different standards of how to do lettering in comic books. So this is pretty cool. Like this is my resource, and I would definitely recommend you to check this out. It's called blambot.com, and I'll provide a link. All right, so now that you've selected which font you want to use, you're back on this. And your font's obviously not going to look like that, right? We're going to now write it. We're going to write a statement. For example, hi, how are you? And look at this. This makes no sense. Why the heck does it look like that? Now the reason, and for some of you it might not look like that, but at some point when you change the size of the font, it's going to look like that. And let me show you real quick. Let's go back to the original size that we were at. We're somewhere around that size. And let me zoom in. Look at that gap. It's increased, right? It's not tangled up anymore. And the bigger that we make this font, the more it gets tangled up. Well, without going too much into the science behind this, essentially Photoshop Photoshop maintains the distance between the center of this text and this text, no matter what size you make it at. So the best way, or the easiest way to kind of get away from that, is instead of increasing the font size over here, you're going to increase the entire text. And the way you do this is the same way you would increase any image or anything else. You'd use a tool called Free Transform. I'll click on Control T, and you click on Control T, and it creates this little box. And now you can either freeform transform, which I never do. I mainly use Shift. I click Shift to maintain the size and orientation, or sorry, like the shape. So it's not making it like kind of squished. It maintains that shape. So you click Shift. If you want to increase it from the middle, then you are going to have Shift and Alt selected, and then you see how now it just gets bigger from the center. And we'll be using this a lot, so you'll get pretty comfortable with that. So now let's say this is the size we want to go with. And then now you've picked this shape. Now the way to get out of this, free transform section is you're going to click Enter. All right. So now we're out of that. So it says, hi, how are you? One of the things you're going to read in blambot.com, and I just might as well mention it, typically when you're working with the letter I, and this pretty much is exclusively with the letter I, whenever it's next to a different word like hi, you'll never see it like this. You typically see it like that, where you don't have those lines on top and bottom, right? So whenever you're working with the letter I, and if it's next to other letters, keep it in small caps. If it's on its own, like for example, I am, you'll have it with you'll write it like that. So those are some things to just kind of keep in mind while you're working with text grammar. But anyways, all right, hi, how are you? That's how you're going to typically write it. All right, now let me talk about another tool that's going to come in pretty handy, because for some of you guys, you're going to need to manipulate this a little bit. And the way you do that is like, okay, if you don't know, for example, you increase the size or whatnot, but you don't like this gap between these two, or you want to increase it, or you want to decrease the gap, or the gap between these letters, you don't like that too much, you want to make it more or less. Now the way you do that is you double click on the text, and then you go over here on this character section on the right hand side. If you don't have this, the way to get it is you go under Windows, and then you click right here where it says character and select that. And that's how it will select. This will bring it on the right hand side. All right, so we're going to click on character. And when we click on this, now you get more options. And I typically stick to this. I don't really look at the stuff on the top. This gives me more options. I can change the font over here. I can do all the other stuff that I was doing before, but then I also have more options. And I definitely recommend you play around with them. But basically, this right here, and you can toggle on it by clicking left on your mouse and toggle right and left. And that's how you can change the size between the letters. I don't really ever use this. I don't even know what it does. But anyways, this will change the gap between the letters, so you can increase or decrease it. And typically when it comes to comics, you're not supposed to have too much gap. It's not the normal gap. You keep it kind of tight, not to where it's uncomfortable to read, but it's at least close enough, because people are typically more focused on the images rather than text. You know, whatever feels right to you, but this is how you're going to change that. I don't really use this either, but this basically makes it longer. I don't know why you will use that. You could use it in some sound effects, but just for normal text, I would never use it really. And just change it, put it back to 100%. So that stretches it upwards. This is going to stretch it sideways. I don't typically use that either. And then this will make it go up and down. Now you're probably wondering, well, you know, why don't I just move it up and down? Well, the reason why you would need this is, for example, let's say you just want to make how for some reason go up, right? So then you'll just select that word and then you'll toggle this up and down. And typically, and let me show you a practical use of it. Like for example, let's say someone's nervous while they're saying how. So the way you do it is you move that up a little bit and that down a little bit. And so you get the point. Okay, so now we went over how you select this, or how you use this button. Oh, some of the other, and I definitely recommend you guys to play around with this. Some of the other options are you can make it bold, you can make it slanted. So there's different options you can select over here, but I typically only stick to the bold and slanted, so that's one of the things that you should kind of keep in mind. All right, so now that we have this, let's talk about orienting text. All right, and what I mean by that is two things. Essentially, when you're looking at your text, where the middle text is a little bit more than the top and the bottom, on the top you'll stick to one or two words, and majority of your words are going to come right here in the middle of your statements. Let me make this a little bit more. How are you, my friend? That's how you always need to be thinking. Is you need to start creating text that makes it look like where most of the letters come towards the middle section. And you'll find that out when we start working on shapes, why that's important. But that's how you stack them. Another thing that you need to remember with lettering is that lettering is an art of itself. And what I mean by that is you have to be kind of careful on where you put your text, because essentially you have to think about when we're reading from left to right, that means our eyes are going from left to right. And sometimes you can use this very effectively, because let's say I want people, if I put this over here, okay, and let me make more text, let's say. The way I'm going to read it is I'm going to read this, I'm going to read it over here, and my eyes went right over this guy right here, who's VJ actually in the comic book. And then when I have my text over here, my eyes are going to go from here down here. I missed all this information. So if you want people to see this information, if it's relevant, then put some text here or put it somewhere close to where you want people to have their eyes go. And typically the way comic books, the lettering works is like this, like almost like a Z. So it goes from here, 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 like that. So that's how the orientation works. So it's something to kind of keep in mind, and it's pretty important. All right, now another thing to talk about is, let's say you have your text in this kind of dark area. Now this is really difficult to look at. One of the things that I always do, and I'm going to delete most of this stuff so it's easy to kind of look at. All right, so let's say you have your text and it's black font and you can't read it on top of your image. One of the standard things that I do is I create a white stroke around this so that it's easy for me to read it no matter where I have it in the page. And there's also another reason why we do that as well, and I'll show that later when we start working on the speech bubbles. But the way to make a white stroke around it so you can read it a little bit better is you go on the text button and you right click and you click on this thing called blending options. And this is really cool because you're going to use this a lot, especially when you're working on sound effects. So you click blending options, and then you get a bunch of these different options. If you don't see anything here, the way to get them is you click on this bottom left here, and then you say show all effects or whatever. And so you get all your different options. What we're going to be working specifically on is stroke. And you click on stroke, and we're going to change the color to white. Now it looks kind of funky right here because what it's happening is it's making this all the stroke happen from the center of the border of this shape of the text. So if I make it like too much, you'll see how it just kind of makes it all white. So what we're going to do is, instead of stroke through the center, we're going to do outside. And we're going to give it a little bit of weight. All right, that's good. So now we can read it a lot better. And so we're going to click OK. So that's how you're going to do to create a stroke around. And it makes it easier to read. Okay, now let's say you've made this text, and each time you don't want to change the the stroke and the effects that you added, or going back and clicking the font, selecting the font. Let's say this is your standard text that you're going to use every time. So the best way to replicate this each time is you click on Alt, and while you have Alt, oh, by the way, you have to be selected on Move. Click on the text, and then on your keyboard hit Alt, and you'll get this little like black and white arrows, which means that we're duplicating this now. And then you just drag, and now you've duplicated it. And you want to duplicate it again, you just drag it again, and that's how you duplicate this text. And you keep the same fonts or whatnot. Another way to do that, which you might use sometimes, is you get this text on the layer section, and then you drag it on top of this create new layer, like so. And that way you duplicate it as well, but I don't really do it that way. So just showing you different options. All right, so that's how you duplicate text. And we're just going to kind of duplicate it a few times here. With text, you got to keep in mind that we are essentially replicating tone of conversation. Nobody talks like, "How are you, my friend?" Right? We might say, "Hi, how are you, my friend?" Now the emphasis on "are," like "How are you, my friend?" We can show that in text by doing different things. And one of the ways to do that is by getting that word "are" and making it bold. There you go. So now we're saying, "Hi, how are you, my friend?" It emphasizes on that. And this is just kind of an example, but that's when you use bold, is basically when you're changing the tone. If you want to show that someone's screaming, right? If you want to show the change in volume, the way you do that, so right now, when it's all the same size, basically you're saying they're talking in the same tone. But if this guy's like yelling, "Hi," the way you would do that is you would change the size of the word "hi." And now that we change the size, now it kind of replicates that, or kind of shows that he's yelling the word "hi." Then you can do different things, like for example, if you want to show that someone's whispering, you'll change it from like a black font to like maybe a gray font to kind of show that, "Hi, how are you, my friend?" If someone actually talks like that, it'll look crazy. But those are just some options for you, how to change volume, tone. If you're whispering or if you're yelling, you can do certain things over there. And also the way you make your shapes can also change the tone as well. So you maneuver between text and shapes to show what kind of tone the character is talking in. All right. So now that we've discussed all that, one of the last things that I want to show to you in the text section is how do you do spell check, is what I'm going to show you. Because you're going to be working with a lot of text, and you want to make sure that you're not making some mistakes with basic spelling. So let's say we change the spelling of this and we put an E there. The way to do spell check is you go on the top and you click on Edit. And over here, there's a section right here called check spelling. So you just click that, and there you go. It immediately picked on the top where it says "not in dictionary, friend." This is how you want to change it. You can either add it to the dictionary if it's a word, for example, that you don't want to be corrected. Something, I don't know, like if it's a sound effect or something like that that the dictionary won't recognize, you can add it to the dictionary. And so all you do is, now that it gave you the correct spelling, you just click change, and it says spell check is complete, and your spelling's been corrected. So it's a pretty handy tool. I typically do that towards the end after I'm done with all my text. All right, so now that we've already discussed the text tool, now let's get into the shapes tool. Now, before we get into shapes tool, I do want to mention one other thing. I want to maintain the, all right, let me just do the text because this is going to be confusing. I don't know how to explain this, but all right, so let's get into the shape tool. Now we're going to be making these shapes. And the way to do it is you're going to create a new layer by clicking this button right here. So we created a new layer. I don't really need that. And then let's say this is your text. You're going to go over here on the bottom and you're going to right click on this custom shape tool. And remember, the short key to that is U. And we're going to click on this ellipse tool. All right, now that we clicked on ellipse tool, we are going to get our cursor and just kind of somewhere over here, we're going to drag and make it around our text in the best way we can. And boom. So it's created this little white circle around. And then you can click on this. And I purposely kind of selected this on the bottom, but let me just show you real quick. Remember when I talked about stacking? Make sure that, you see, if I put this on the top, it covers the text. So make sure you have the shape in the very bottom. All right. So now that we have this in the bottom, here's going to be some problem that you might face, is that you're trying to move the shape, but you can't move the shape because every time you click on it, it's not moving it. The reason why is because we have auto select selected. At this point in time, you can probably take off the auto select and then find the ellipse tool, and that way you can move it around. Or another thing you can do is, and this is going to be a little bit difficult, is to find the very bottom edge of this shape and then move it, because what's happening is think about it, there's a box created around this text, so anywhere you click on it, it's thinking it's a text. Oops, that didn't work out. Anyways, you get the point. I'm just trying to cover some of the basics of some things that you might come across. But all right, so now that we have this shape tool, the shape selected, that's not typically how a text box would look like. It looks pretty close, but it's not exactly the way you would want it. And the way you fix that now is that you don't want it to be exactly that round. You want it to be a little bit squished from the top, bottom, and kind of the sides. That's how more or less a text box looks like, or text, speech bubble looks like. So you click on this white arrow button right here, and then you click back on this circle, and you get these weird things right here. So what you need to focus on is these dots, right? So we're going to click, and by the way, make sure it's the white arrow. And the way you do that is you right click. The black arrow, what it does is it moves shapes entirety. So it doesn't move individual points of the shape. You use this white tool to move individual points. You see that? All right. Let me get the black tool again. So essentially the black tool is like the move tool, but it's specific to shapes. And when we start, when we have more shapes, I'll show you what those do. So now we click on this or we click on one of the points, and we're gonna squish it a little bit. All right, that doesn't look that great. So the other thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna kind of expand this to, make it a little bit better. Actually, let me squish this a little bit right here. All right, and then what we're gonna do is we're gonna get this, and we're going to move it to the right. Now you can see this kind of becomes a little funky like that. The way to make it like straight is you keep your clicked on shift, and that way now you keep this straight, so you're not moving it left and right. All right, so we do it like that, like that. All right, and then we click on that. You can take your finger off shift, and then I click on this, and I'll put my finger back on shift to make it like so, and like so. And so then you just kind of, you work your way through it, making sure everything is in there comfortably. And that's how you basically make the shape for this font. So you're noticing this doesn't quite yet look like a text bubble that you're used to, because it doesn't have that border around it. And the way, you might be like, all right, the way you get the border is using the stroke tool, right? You could do the same thing when we go to blending options when you have the shape selected, and then click on stroke and change the color to black, and boom, there you go. You could do it that way. I don't recommend that, and I'll show you why. All right, so we're working here, and let's assume we did it the way we did blending stroke option. Now let's say we're going to make the tail, or where we have the direction tool. You're going to use, or the direction for the tail for the speech bubble. We're going to use this pen tool, and anywhere we'll kind of click where the bottom is of this tail, where the front of the tail is, and then back there, and then we're going to close it. Now look at that. It has this weird kind of like look to it. So let's say we want to add the stroke to this as well. Blending options, stroke. Oh my God, this looks horrible, right? Now that's why I don't do stroke on this individually. So the best way to do this is take out the stroke from these two images, and you go over here on. What we're gonna do is we're gonna get the text and the shapes and select it all and put it inside a folder. We're going to call this folder a speech folder. And there's many benefits of doing this. I'm going to show you what those are. So now we're going to select blending options on the folder, the entire folder. We'll go blending options, and we're going to hit stroke. Boom, voila. You see now everything is kind of smooth. But one of the things I want to mention here is, look at this. Let's bring this down to where it's a little bit easier to see. Look at this shape right here. It kind of has this rounded, shape, and that doesn't really look that good. So what you're going to do is you're going to go to stroke, and the reason why it's doing that, is creating this curve, is because we have this under outside. That works for text when we did the stroke for the text, but not for the shapes. For shapes, we put this in the center. When we do it in center, it gives it like more of a nice sharper look. If you put it inside, it gives it an even sharper look. But that's your choice. I typically keep it at center, and I think that works fine. Another cool thing that it does, with the folder, is, now check this out. Remember, let me see if I can copy. Let me show you the difference. Now, this is how originally we had it without the folder. Now look at this. It doesn't really go well, like it's not merged with this, text box, and that's not how typically text works in comic books. Typically, the way it works is the border around this will continue to go over this text, and the best way to do that is if you put this inside the folder. All right. So let's say this text is now outside the folder. All you do is you drag it and you put it inside the folder. And now check this out. Voila! Look, the border goes around that text, and this comes in really handy when you're working with text. So that's why you want to use everything within the folder. And it's the best way to kind of work through it. Now let's say you want to move this, around, and you probably be tempted to, okay, move the text, then you move the shape, and you move the, the tail. But that's not the best way to do it. That's not the best way to do it. Okay, and I'm using it myself. The best way to do it, I would say, is you click on the text and you press on Shift, and you click on the shape, and then you click on the tail. And now when you have it all selected, now you can move it all together. And that makes it a lot beneficial. All right. Now let's get a little bit more into this tail section of the shapes. You go, sometimes you'll see it sharp like that, but a lot of times it's not going to be that way. And I just did something without mentioning it. If you want to get rid of having everything selected, you just click anywhere on the sheet, and then now you can move things individually. All right, so back to what I was saying. Typically, this is not like a triangle. Typically has that kind of curved look. And so the way you would do that is you use a select tool, you use the pen tool, right? And you click here, and there's one or two ways of doing this. I'm going to show you the way that I think it's easiest. Is that you click here and keep your finger selected on the left key, and then you just drag it, and you see now we're creating this curve. And then we're going to go back and we're going to go over it and we're going to put it over here. And now I created this really weird shape, but we're going to fix that later, so don't worry about it. And then we'll connect it right here. Now the way you fix that is you go back to this pen tool and you right click on it, and you see where it says convert point tool? Click on that. Now then when we click on that, here's where it gets a little bit tricky, but keep in mind where this shape was, because you like that shape. You click on this and it makes this triangle. Keep your finger clicked and you start dragging it, and we'll bring it back to the shape it was, right? Once that happens, now these buttons right here, or these little kind of toggle points, changes this shape individually now that when we let it go. So click on this right here, and then just kind of bring it, and you typically want to keep it like somewhere like that. And that's how you create that little loopy look. Now, let's say you don't like this kind of shape right here. Like I mentioned earlier, when the way you adjust any shape, you're going to go back to this and you're going to click on this white arrow, and you're going to click on that point and just move it around wherever you feel like is right. Now, this does take a little bit of time, and let's say you want to save the time. You love this shape, you use it a lot. What if you want to save this shape, or save this button right, like this shape right here, the circle shape? Well, I save all my shapes because it saves me a lot of time, and I'll tell you how I do this. The way you do that is you click on this black arrow, click on the shape so that the shape is selected, and so you can tell this shape is selected with this little blue line, and then you go to is it edit? Yes, you go to edit, and you go to over here on the bottom, say define custom shape, and there you go. Just name it. You don't have to name it, and let's say that's the shape we want, or we want this tail. We want to save this tail shape. So we go to this black button, the blue is selected, and we go to edit, define custom shape, and there it is, shape A44 or whatever. Click OK. Now it's saved, and the way to find it is you go back to the same place where that circle was, or you press U, your custom shape option, or your shapes, and you click right here where it says custom shape tool, this little kind of wiggly thing. And once you click that, look on the very top. You'll find it right here on the bottom. And these are some of the shapes that I've saved. But you'll find it right here on the bottom. And now you can bring that shape every time. You can change it a little bit or whatnot. So it's extremely helpful and makes it very efficient to save the shapes. And it helps a lot. All right, so that's pretty much everything that I think you need to know when it comes to creating text. Pretty basic, pretty simple. If I didn't go over something, please give me a shout out. Let me know what is it here that you would like to learn, and I'd be more than happy to talk to you through it. But that is how basically you create shapes. And oh, you know what? Let me might as well discuss one more thing. A lot of times you're gonna have, or sometimes you're gonna basically have this. You're gonna be talking. Okay, let's say you're talking, and you want something over here. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this shape, and the way I do it real quick is I press on Alt and I create a shape here. And you want to connect this to that. Basically it's the same way you do this tail button right here, where you go to that pen tool, you click here, you click somewhere over here, give it a little bit of a shape, and then click here, and then click on the side over here and give it a little bit of a shape. And then you close it, and then we'll fix it up by clicking on that white arrow there, and let's see how we can fix it. Maybe make it like that. Yeah, that looks a little bit better. So that's essentially how you do it. I mean, I kind of made it really rough, but anyways, that's pretty much everything you'll ever need to use with the shape. The only other thing might be is that you might need to connect shapes to make it look like, you know, when you have those two, you just kind of bring and drag it up, and you have your text right there. So yeah, it's pretty simple. Another thing that I just thought about is sometimes when you write these texts, you don't want the shapes to kind of go across the border. There's one easy way of solving that, and the way I do that is, let's say you don't want it to go past this line. Well, you go back to the shape over here and click on this rectangle tool. And remember, that shape that you want to make that adjustment to needs to be selected. And you just kind of go over, I'm zooming in, pressing Alt, and you just go over with your cursor. Don't press yet. Press on the Alt until you see this minus sign on that shape. And basically what it's saying now is that we're going to subtract something from this shape. Because you see this is still blue, it's selected. So we're just going to kind of go somewhere in the midpoint, and then it's dragged down. But right now it's doing this weird thing. Well, keep your mouse clicked, the clicker, your left mouse clicked, and remove your finger from the Alt, because basically it's making it go center. And now you see now, once you removed your finger from the Alt, the shape stays in the middle of that line, and then you just kind of drag it down, and boom, voila. We've now hidden the shape. Now, earlier when we were discussing that, you know, this move tool versus the black move tool, and you're probably wondering what's the difference. So let's say we have this shape and we click on this move tool. If I move this, look what happened. You know, this kind of stays that way because it's moving that entire shape. But in order to move individual shapes, you'd have to use this black tool, or this black arrow, and you click on the shape, and now when you move it, it just moves the shape. And then let's say you can put it further in, and you keep on moving it down as much as you want, and you know, you can click on that, and you can click Control T and to transform that box, and voila. So there's different things you can do. I know kind of went through this really quickly. This is my first training session. I know it must have been a little bit rough and bumpy, but you know, I'd love to get feedback. You know, this is the very basics of how to create text in Photoshop, and I hope it was very beneficial to you guys. So please comment, let me know what you guys think, and if you want more clarification on anything else, please feel free to reach out to me. All right, thanks guys, and until next time, have a good one.